At the end of World War II, there's an island off the coast of Russia. It's right above Japan, and it's called the Sakhalin Island. And at the end of the war, it was given back to Russia. It was during the war split. The southern half was occupied by Japanese soldiers, and at the end of the war, Russia was low on resources, and there was, although there were small amounts of coal and iron, and they had a few small crops too, but it was enough to mine for. And during 1946, there was a mining accident, and there isn't really much known about it. But the miners were all sick after it was. I think it was in the beginning of the summer. There isn't really much information about it, and they sent the local doctors up from the south, and they were trying to diagnose the miners, and it seemed like it was a bacteria, and they were given antibiotics, and they did not get better, and they were showing signs of schizophrenia, and it was only in the older miners that this was happening, and after studying into it more often, they found out that it was transmitted. It was an airborne bacteria. So, fearing the contamination of the rest of the town, they quarantined all the miners, and the doctors that actually were later found out to be infected as well. And once news got out, Russia did not want to take any chances with the mines in the south to be infected, so they quarantined the entire town and all the miners and the doctors for a mandatory 4-month quarantine. And after that, they sent in doctors from the mainland with the proper equipment to not be infected themselves. And during the early stages of their investigation, they discovered a few things. The bacteria can only survive in warm temperature. They're assuming it survived in it was deep under the soil. So although the island is actually cold, the soil underneath was warm, and it was brought up by the miners' warm lungs. And once it was in the body, it could easily survive and make copies of itself. And the doctors, in the doctors' early reports, they emphasize on the mental illness of the miners and other people and their families, and stated that the bacteria, once in the brain, would affect the thought process and have other effects like hallucinations and schizophrenia. Although the more severe conditions occurred only in the oldest miners, the young children were. It seemed as if it was just a normal bacterial infection, but nothing too bad. And the strange way the bacteria spread is kept Russia to extend the quarantine, and they sent in food supplies and living supplies, and basically told the miners to wait it out and pretty much try to live a normal life in the town. After a few years, there's not really much said about it, and no other country really knew about it until the 1970s, during the Cold War, or the Second Cold War. There was a reconnaissance mission taking pictures of the island, and they saw a small quarantine town. And after investigating into it, they still couldn't find anything out about it. But recently, in the 1990s, there's been lots of questions about the island, since the whole north side is pretty much deserted, because the small town is at the very northern edge of the island, and a lot of the in the late 90s, more doctors were sent in with more modern medicine, but they feared that it wasn't so much antibiotics and such that would fix the miners. It was more of a mental issue now, and there wasn't really much they could do. So they kept the area quarantined for longer, and is still quarantined to this day. And it's just kind of strange because the whole town, I guess, would be mentally unstable, and I don't think there's any sort of leader who'd go inside because they're in fear of getting infection. And with the rise of the temperature of the whole world and global warming, the threat of this bacteria to spread is constantly growing. And if the scientists say if it's over 85, that's when it can really start to, I mean, it's better in the 90s, but in the 85 range Fahrenheit, it can spread quite easily. And so and apparently there are still children, and I guess that would be the grandchildren of the miners, because they lived a normal life, are still there, and they're infected. And just, I guess, the more because nothing really can be done until, I guess, as the Russians were saying, everybody dies or a cure is found. So the proper funding is all that they need. Russian funding gave up in the end of the 80s, and it's just a matter of funding to figure out how to help the miners.